Hello everyone, Jester Geo here. Welcome back to another installment of First Look. In today's video, we will be talking about the Peddler, who should be coming to the game in roughly a week. She will be a store character, so you won't have to worry about RNG to try her early. Because of that, it's gonna be very important to understand how she works and whatnot. Don't worry, this won't be on the same length as the balance changes video was. In fact, I am writing this script a day after finishing making the balance changes video. However, since it is only Peddler we are talking about, this shouldn't take that long, I would guess maybe a few minutes. So, with that very brief prelude out of the way, let's begin with actually talking about Peddler. As usual, we will be getting into her skills first before we get into my thoughts on the character. Peddler starts the match with one charge-based ability she can use, which then branches out into 3 different ones. Gifted Merchant allows her to absorb the terrain around her, causing different effects to occur. Upon fully absorbing, she will also gain a new ability depending on what she absorbs. She can hold up to 2 of these absorb abilities and they are gotten in unique ways. Absorbing the terrain also causes an effect to happen, which is meant to help her in the early game. The absorbing range is 8 meters and you receive an 50% slowdown while absorbing. Getting into the actual specifics of what you can absorb the ground, terrain, or interactables. Absorbing the ground will leave behind a trap, which has a 1.5 meter range. This trap will stay up for 12 seconds and any survivor who steps in this trap will be trapped for 2 seconds. Absorbing the terrain, such as walls or obstacles, will create a temporary passageway. Both the Peddler and survivors can go through this passageway, so keep that in mind. There is a limit to how thick an obstacle must be to form the passageway, so you can't use it like a priestess portal. These passageways will only last for 14 seconds before reverting back to the original terrain. Finally, absorbing interactables, such as ciphers, gates, chests, lockers, and rocket chairs, will lock them for 12 seconds. This means neither the survivor nor the hunter can interact with them during that time. This also means you can't chair survivors on locked rocket chairs, so keep that in mind. After the 12 seconds are up, the interactable you locked will be back in use again. That's it for the absorption aspect of her kit, but that isn't the main lethality of her kit. That comes in the form of the abilities you can use upon absorbing a certain thing. You can hold 2 charges per ability, with 5 total charges between all the abilities. If you absorb the ground, you will gain the ability to use Nature's Affinity. Nature's Affinity will cause Peddler to summon a vine to dash forward. This vine will move up to 35 meters, in which it'll stop afterwards. Whether the vine grabs something or not, the Peddler can use the vine to quickly bring her to where the vine stopped at. The Peddler will only stop her pull if something gets in her way or if she is stunned/pushed back during it. If the survivor is grabbed by the vine, they will be bound from 0.5 seconds to 2.5 seconds depending on the vine's length. Mineral's Affinity is an ability Peddler gets for absorbing the terrain and it causes her to release a mineral shard. She can choose where to aim her shard in a 15-meter radius, which it will then go to that area and explode. If a survivor is caught in the initial explosion, they will receive a chip hit for it. Afterwards, it will create a gravel stone, in which any survivor who is on said gravel zone will receive a 20% decoding and interaction speed penalty for 10 seconds. Finally, absorbing interactables will give Peddler Metal Affinity, which just giga buffs all her stats. During giga buff mode, all stuns, knockback, pushback, and slowdown effects will be reduced by 50%. Additionally, her attack range will be increased by 2 meters and her movement speed will be increased by 10%. This effect will only last for 8 seconds, however, so make it count. That pretty much covers everything about her base kit. Similar to Ivy, most of what she can do is in her base kit. Because of that, her Tier 1 and Tier 2 skills are not as oppressive as other hunter skills, so let's get into them. At Presence 1, Peddler will gain Steady Profit, which simply increases her absorption range to 12 meters. At Final Presence, Peddler gets Tremendous Wealth, which decreases absorption's recovery time. If I had to make a rough estimate, I would guess that Peddler's absorption time is 20 seconds. Because of that, it's safe to assume that her max presence time will be 15 seconds instead. Whether this is wrong or not, I'm confident that the reduction is about 5 seconds. With that being said, that pretty much covers everything that is in Peddler's kit. Similar to Ivy, her kit is extremely bloated, with a lot of things going for her and a lot of tools she can use. At a first glance, she does look absolutely terrifying to go up against, especially with her vine. It's very easy to just look at the hunter who can literally go through walls and just call her broken. However, in my honest opinion, as I let this trailer marinate in my mind and watch the test server, I honestly don't think she is as bad as people say she is. Is she balanced in any stretch of the imagination? Ah, hell no. However, I do think that, unlike Hullabaloo and Goatman, the way to counter her is a lot easier to find than some would think. Let's start off with Metal Affinity, which I think is the easiest of the skills to play around. The reason Metal Affinity looks so scary is because of the almost immunity to harassers and the attack range. Not only that, but the movement speed can make it a very scary tool to close out the gap. I think with enough good play with this skill, it can be an absolute menace to face off against if a peddler has this skill on hand. However, while this skill seems really strong at dealing with those harassers, I don't see it working too well in kiting areas. This skill doesn't buff your pallet breaking speed or window vaulting speed, so you still need to deal with them. Not to mention, depending on the area, there are a plethora of pallets or obstacles to work with. The skill also doesn't reduce how long you will be knocked back for, only how far you're knocked back. Because of that, characters like Batter won't have that big of an issue against her, since he can use his knockback as a mini stun. This effect in general also doesn't really help her against a lot of the survivor roster, since they will have skills to deal with it. Whether it be mobility items, kiting items, or tanking abilities, all of these can deal with this buff very well. Because of that, a survivor can easily wait out the 8-second timer Peddler places on her, thus causing her to waste the ability. Mineral Affinity is another one that can be very scary to deal with, but honestly isn't that bad. When Peddler uses Mineral Affinity, there is a small window in which the ability must reach the point she aimed at. It's only then will the explosion happen and the gravel zone appears to affect survivors. Because of that, survivors do have a small window where they can avoid the chip hit or bait it out. After the explosion happens, the gravel zone cannot harm you anymore, meaning you are safe to run into the area. What also helps against these gravel zones are the various buffs survivors have gotten in this patch. Magician's Wand will allow him to mind game Peddler, which can cause her to miss the gravel zone onto Magician. As for Little Girl, now that she can vault during a push, this can allow her to get a free vault against the gravel zone. That isn't even factoring in the fact that the current survivors have abilities that'll allow them to avoid her or her gravel zones. The biggest examples of this are Auntie, Acro, and Wendy, who don't need to deal with slower vaults. The gravel zone does slow down rescues, so it can be a bit scary to go into rescue against Peddler. However, that's still not a problem, as the current rescuers should be more than capable of pulling the rescue off. This is especially the case if you have Postman, who can negate the slowdown, or Knight, who can use Chivalrous. Suffice to say, while it does look very scary, it's actually not that bad. Now we move on to the absorption effects, which aren't also as bad as they seem. The first effect I feel a lot of people are blowing so far out of proportion is the interactable absorption ability. The main thing people refer to when talking about this absorption is the fact that she can lock cipher machines. And it's understandable as to why people are afraid that Peddler's cipher lock will make her the next Clerk. Clerk's cipher lock can be extremely obnoxious to deal with in a tie or losing game, so a repeat of that sounds horrifying. However, I feel like her cipher lock is gonna be the least disruptive slowdown ability in the game. This is because of one simple fact: you can only lock ciphers that are within 8 meters at presence 0 and 12 meters at presence 1. Because of that, the only way you will really be able to lock ciphers as Peddler is if you are on top of them. And, if you didn't catch on, if you are on top of a cipher, a survivor might not even decode it to begin with. The only time the cipher lock could prove to be useful is if you bottleneck the final 3 ciphers in one area. In this situation, it can definitely be very annoying to deal with her cipher pressure. However, this isn't really unique to her, as Ivy and Clerk can do the same and more. Because both her gravel zone and cipher lock need to be done at close range, it makes her cipher control not really as bad. Because of that, I don't think a Peddler is gonna get much value with the interactable absorption. The only benefit there is to using it is for the Giga buff, in my opinion. Then there's the terrain absorption, which is definitely a scarier ability to face off against. The fact that she can just go through walls makes her able to catch you off guard if you are kiting. However, as long as you chain kiting areas and keep moving, you shouldn't really be at risk. This ability doesn't really do much for survivors who are great at transitioning, so it can put Peddler in a bad position. Additionally, there are certain areas where the pathway won't really be as effective. If you're in an area with an abundance of pallets and obstacles, you can just go to the area outside of the pathway. Additionally, certain survivor abilities can make it so you can avoid any cheap hits caused by it. This includes wand, perfume, page, owl, elbow pad, basically any reactive ability. This can help get you out of those sticky situations where the Peddler will try and ambush you via the wall. It also doesn't work on walls that are too thick, such as buildings on the town maps. This means, in the case of the cottage on Lakeside, you are safe against this wall if the basement doesn't spawn there. The pathway is still a really strong ability that can be used to end chases easily. However, there's still options survivors can do to deal with it, so I don't think it's that bad. Now, from what I've been making it sound like, it might seem like I think she's a relatively balanced hunter to deal with. Sure, there's a lot of strong abilities that she has, but it's nothing too crazy. However, I do think there are things about Peddler that are genuinely unfair to go against. Let's start with the tamest of the problems, that being traps from absorbing the ground. Now, on its own, the trap themselves aren't really that bad to deal with. Similar to the gravel explosion, you can still maneuver around them or bait them out. However, unlike gravel traps, they are a bigger threat because they can stun you. You can use stuff like Flywheel to deal with this or survivor abilities like Orfeo to tank the stun. However, good trap placements can be very annoying, especially considering they stay up for so long. Their lack of range early game, however, makes it so she can't consistently trap you. There is one thing that should be removed from these traps in my opinion, even though I know they won't. For some reason, you can place traps on top of the rocket chairs, which means you can stall out the rescue. I think this is a bad thing to keep, as it just means the rescuer will have no way to rescue while the trap is up. This gets even worse if she hits you early and the trap wasn't triggered ahead of time. This makes going for the rescue a literal death trap, as 2 seconds is more than enough to recover from attack recovery. That's not even getting into the fact that she can just place another trap down to stun for an additional 2 seconds. Personally, I feel this should be removed, as it just makes Peddler's camp a bit too strong. Sure, against certain survivors, it will not really do much to impede on the rescue. However, for most survivors, it can be too much, which I am heavily against. They will not, sadly, because they showed Peddler doing it in her trailer. That means that her being able to place traps on chairs is an intended mechanic, which is just dumb. Since that is the case, though, then adding an anti-camping mechanic can fix this. The best way they can fix this is reducing the time to 1 second if next to a chair. That way, you can still benefit from the traps while they won't remain overbearing. However, traps themselves lead into an entirely different problem, that being the vine ability. Put simply, the vine ability is ridiculous and is probably the most overtuned aspect of her kit. It is essentially a gamekeeper hook that you have control over, which can curve, and stuns you upon grab. Even if she misses you, it doesn't really matter, since she can pull herself to the location where it last stopped. Now, if you're next to a window or a pallet, you might have a fighting chance to avoid it. If you have an ability to dodge the vine, you can also avoid the vine well. However, most of the times, she will just use the vine while you are transitioning or while you're in the open. Not only that, but the vine itself extends way further than your fear radius. This means a Peddler can ambush you with her vine unless you're paying close attention. In these situations, there's not much you can do to avoid the hit. This is also because Peddler can react faster than you have to break free from the vine. Because of that, most Vine uses become a free hit, which kinda sucks for the survivor. I think if they were to nerf the range of the Vine or reduce the stun time by a little bit, it would fix these issues. However, I don't think this is the biggest issue Peddler has when it comes to Vine. No, the biggest problems have got to be the cooldowns both the absorption and the charge abilities have. 5 seconds per ability charge and 20 seconds of absorption is a little absurd if you ask me. Obviously, for stuff like walls and interactables, that isn't so bad for the absorption. On top of that, 5 seconds to cycle through mineral and metal affinity is also not that bad. However, it's when you factor in the nature affinity where it sorta gets insane. Getting one vine every 20 seconds already sounds pretty crazy given what the vines can do. It basically means, as long as you absorb the ground often, you'll never run out of vine. However, once you do get 2 vines, kiting can potentially be impossible in certain situations. Your cooldown for using the vine starts when you use it, meaning when your attack recovery ends, your vine will be off cooldown. This means you can chain 2 vine abilities together in one interaction. If the survivor isn't prepared for it or you force them in a bad area, you can effectively down them in 10 seconds. Now, am I saying this is completely uncounterable? Absolutely not. There are still things you can do to increase your odds of survival and you'll always have tools. However, I do think the nature aspects and the cooldowns are pushing that line of going a bit overboard. Honestly, if they remove traps next to rocket chairs and increase the cooldowns, she would be in a healthier spot without killing her. Even now, I do think Peddler is a very balanced hunter with a lot of well-known counterplay to her. However, there's a lot of bullshit that needs to be ironed out, especially the cooldowns. Nevertheless, that's really all I have to say on Peddler. I do think, when stacked with the meta hunters, she's definitely a lot more fair than them. She still has bullshit, don't get me wrong, but said bullshit isn't as terrible like Hullabaloo or Goatman. With that being said, that's really it for my thoughts on Peddler. She'll be available next week in the shop, so look forward to a deeper dive on her then. Until then, thank you so much for watching and I'll see you all next time.
Hold it!